thank you again for joining us with our podcast series. Inshallah, we will yet again share with you the reflections for self-development, and as we go along with our conversation, we'll discover some of the beauties of spiritual reflections. So Mufti, I think you mentioned in episode 0 regarding drinking tea. You love drinking tea. I'd like to ask a personal question. What kind of tea do you like to drink?
That's an interesting question. I drink a range of teas. There are specific types for specific times of the day, even the weather, and even what I watch or hear. As I give an example, sometimes when I watch an advertisement or a come across a Hindi movie or a Hindi song,
Okay.
what immediately comes to mind is masala tea because of the spices, right? And it just triggers me to either buy one or make one, and I enjoy that masala tea at that point. Usually it's in the afternoon. Otherwise, I drink different types. In the evenings, for example, I prefer to drink either green tea or black tea, just black tea with no sugar, no milk. If I do drink black tea with milk and sugar or a bit of sugar and so on, usually in the morning, early in the day, because there's the rest of the day to burn, all the calories of the sugar and milk. So different types of tea, and I like to try different ranges, and I learn from those sort of trials which ones work for me, which ones don't.
So it depends on the timing of the day, and probably depends on the mood and
Exactly.
and weather as well. You mentioned about drinking masala tea as if it's just available near your kitchen. Do you make your own masala tea?
I do, yes, I do actually. It's quite difficult to find a masala tea that I really like. So usually I try to make my own because I feel happy making it, and I try my best to make it for somebody else too.
Okay.
So at home, I'm very lucky that my wife likes my masala tea. So at least we can make for the both of us.
Yeah.
It's not too difficult. I mean, you just put some spices like usually cardamom. You won't go wrong with cardamom. And if you have saffron with you, actually I made one for you as well. You can try later.
Yeah, we'll look forward for that.
Yeah, cardamom and saffron. See, the difference making tea at home is you can spend a bit more time making it. When you go elsewhere and buy it, usually people have to rush to make because they have to. There are a lot of customers, not just you. But at home, you can take your time. You can boil the water. You can wait until the tea has really infused very well with the water and the milk and the spices.
Wow.
And so it's always attending to tea or cooking with care and love and give it your attention and focus. The outcome is usually better than anything if you do it very quickly.
Just enjoying the moment in making tea.
Yes, exactly.
The process and all. This actually reminded me when I was doing my umrah in Medina. So they like to drink milk tea a lot there as well. But then there was one time I was walking past by a shop. Then I saw this uncle, Ammu they call it there. There is he was drinking tea, but the tea looked different. The milk tea looked very different. And something similar to the ones that we sometimes see in sarbat tea. I like to drink in sarbat tea. So I was, it's been a long time since I last drink that tea. So I asked him, where can I find this tea? What's it called? Then he told me that this tea, you won't find this anywhere near here. This tea is called Shai Adni.
Yes.
So Shai as in chai, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of Shai Adni before?
Yeah, I've drank Shai Adni twice. One in Jordan, in Amman, and the other in Malaysia. Actually, there is a Yemeni restaurant in Damansara, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow, okay.
I think it's called Hadramaut, the restaurant, and they had Shai Adni. So I had it on my Facebook a long time ago because I had pictures of both Shai Adni, and I said, which one do you think is better, just from the look of it? Yeah, it's a bit. The color is a bit
orange.
unique.
Yeah,
yes,
orange in
that's
color.
right. I think that has to do with the amount of milk, the type of milk, but also more importantly the type of tea leaves. Yeah, so
Okay.
and there's such a big range of tea leaves and where they come from, right? You know that there are tea growing nations like I think the very popular ones are Sri Lanka, associated with Assam tea, Ceylon tea, also China, and also the Himalayas. You know, so these are tea growing regions, and also Tebo, I think, right? Cameron Highlands, Malaysia.
They have their own set of
Yes,
tea
they have their
leaves.
tea leaves. Yes,
Oh,
it's
okay.
also quite nice. So the sarbat ones, I don't particularly know, but sarbat tea, it's not loose leaves. They actually blend everything.
Wow.
Yeah, so
It's
you
that
have different
detailed.
types, and they do give different colors. I think there's some kind of treatment as well. So in the treatment of the tea leaves, once they've dried it, they might put certain things, and that gives
the herbs and
I hope it's natural. Not chemicals or whatever, but
yeah.
it does give off a certain color, certain taste to it. You know, the punginess, the bitterness, and so on. So there's a lot to learn. Just tea, you know, it's a simple thing. Everything's, you know, we think that, you know, just order tea. It's a simple thing, but it can be very complex. As
Yeah.
complex as you want it to be.
Wow. Yeah. So about that, Mufti, I think you mentioned in episode 0, some of the tea significance of or why we drink tea, which is as how you mentioned, being first having a sense of simplicity and tranquility, and lastly, it's about hospitality. So I mean, of course, one of the joys of drinking tea is when we drink with our family members, our friends, especially, you know, sometimes in tea shops. So about hospitality, Mufti, why is it that we we have a sense of joy every time we converse with our friends? We have a conversation with our friends. So is it important for us to have conversations?
Yeah. Before if I may, before I address this or discuss about conversation, I think tea for me is important because it symbolizes a few things you mentioned. One of which is hospitality. You know, we drink tea on our own or alone, but we also often, as you said earlier, we drink tea with guests. And therefore, it symbolizes hospitality, which I think is a very, very powerful value and culture, not just within Islam, but also in our community. The culture of hospitality, of accepting and welcoming guests. And I think that metaphor of hospitality in terms of welcoming guests to your own home or to your place, right? It could be your you know, your office or anywhere else, but someone visiting you. I think that metaphor is very pertinent as we think of conversations, as we think of engaging other people, and particularly other people who are different. So in this regard, I just wanted to also talk about two things. One is, you know, the story of the guests of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? Prophet Abraham, or Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, is known as the paragon of hospitality because of a particular story. I think you know about this story. In the Quran, it's mentioned a few times. One of which is in Surah Al-Zariyat. Hal ataka hadithu dayfi Ibrahim al-Mukramin. So the story of the honored guest of Abraham who came. But there is something very, you know, interesting and unique about this story. And this is because these were guests that Nabi Ibrahim did not know. A, he don't know them, and B, he wasn't expecting them. He wasn't expecting anyone to come. So if dakhalu alayhi faqalu salama, right? So they came to him, to his house, and went in and said salam. Now, you know, this when we think of this story and think of the significance of it, you look at the sequence of events. So he wasn't expecting anyone. He didn't know them, but he just heard a salam at the door. Faqalu salama. Then the Quran says the first thing he Nabi Ibrahim said in response was, Qala salam.
MashaAllah. He responded with peace as
Yes.
well.
He did not actually, like sometimes we do, we try to pick out who is at the door. Are these strangers, and are they like, are they a threat or bringing harm or something?
Yeah.
So the first thing is salam, and he also said, Qala salamun qawmun munkarun. So this group of people who came, the guests, munkarun, they are, some say it's unknown to him, unknown to everybody around him, and some say unusual, so they look a bit different. But the first response is salam, right? Peace, because they offered peace, and he immediately offered peace, regardless of who they were. Regardless of who they were. And that is a first virtue of hospitality that shines through very powerfully. So hospitality is like, even to offer tea, you don't actually say whether you know this person or not. The person sat next to you, just offer the person tea. Can be a friend, can be a stranger. But hospitality is not to make those kind of distinctions. So today, of course, we know about the hospitality industry. People talk about the hotel industry and so on. I think in some ways hospitality is used in a very liberal way, in a very broad way, but it's nothing near to the hospitality that we actually talk about in terms of a spiritual value, because you go to hotels, you have to pay, right?
Yeah.
And the more the more service you expect, the more you have to pay. So nothing is free. They won't offer you tea unless you have paid for the. So strangers come, they actually don't offer you drinks, right? But unless you are booked customer or client of the hotel, then of course you get the treatment. And then the second thing he did was faragha ila ahlihi, and he didn't ask them. So according to the story of Quran, and there's later evidence to show in the text itself that they didn't ask him, or he didn't ask them whether are they hungry, do you need food.
He offered immediately.
Faragha ila ahli, so he went to his family in a haste, like quickly he went. So shows that it's an automatic sort of default behavior and culture that Nabi Ibrahim showed, which he went to his family, and then faja'a bi'ijlin samin, and he came out with a fat roasted cow.
Wow.
And it's samin, so it's not like it means it's the best food.
Yeah.
So you have a group of people who came over, you don't know them, you didn't invite them, you were not expecting them, came over to your place, then said salam, replied with salam, and come in, and then he said, and he prepared food for them, and the best food. Bi'ijlin samin, fat roasted cow. فَقَرَّبَهُ إِلَيْهِمْ, and then he presented, the food to them. فَقَرَّبَهُ إِلَيْهِمْ قَالَ أَلَا تَأْكُلُونَ, do you not eat? So, but they were hesitant because they were angels, right? In the shape of human beings. So obviously they don't eat. And he said, do you not eat? أَلَا تَأْكُلُونَ. And then when the way they reacted, Nabi Ibrahim felt something is not right here. So فَأَوْجَسَ مِنْهُمْ خِيفَةً. So he started to have a bit of fear, like, are these people all right?
A bit suspicious.
Yeah. Who are they? Who are they? Why don't they eat? This is like a fat roasted calf. I brought it up for you. And he said, and they said, قَالُوا لَا تَخَفْ.
MashaAllah.
Right? They said to him, don't be afraid, because we come here to bring you the good news. قَالُوا لَا تَخَفْ وَبَشَّرُوهُ بِغُلَامٍ عَلِيمٍ. So they, gave him the glad tidings of a child that is knowledgeable. So the story then goes on to other things, but I think in terms of hospitality, the story of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam was first, he regardless of who they were.
Yeah, despite being someone we are unfamiliar with, and then the circumstances being that we are unaware of their coming.
Yes, and also whether you need food or not, but brought it out first.
And the best kind of food.
And yes, the best thing that is in his kitchen probably.
Yeah.
Although they didn't eat it, because they don't eat our food. So that is a very powerful story. And I also reminded in terms of greetings and salam in that particular story, we also know that Quran talks about a general sort of teaching, وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُمْ بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحَيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا أَوْ رُدُّوهَا. Right? When you are greeted with a greeting, and it doesn't say what kind of greeting. It doesn't say Assalamu alaikum, but a tahiyya, just a greeting, which means that when people show respect to us, فَحَيُّ بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا, so respond and greet the other person who has greeted you, بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا, with a greeting that is better than what they have offered you, a dua that's better, أَوْ رُدُّهَا, at the very least, respond equally. Again, and I wanted to use this metaphor to conversations and hospitality, because I think conversations are very important, because we learn about other people, we learn about their perspectives, and that of course helps us to understand not just other people but understand the world better, which is a very complex world. But there is an art to a conversation, especially yes, when you want to learn about others and so on. And I think it's a very, very difficult. It's easy. It's an easy sort of principle, but it's a very difficult thing to practice. You need to practice it, which is to begin with detaching ourselves from whatever the other person is saying in terms of trying to interpret it through our lens.
Oh, okay.
And that is about listening very carefully and empathizing with the other person. So, the 10th century mystic, Muslim mystic in Baghdad, he said about this problem of we human beings like to put ourselves at the center. So everybody else, right, is always at
Revolves
the periphery.
around,
You're always at the center. And because of that, you like to annex people. What that means is whatever people say is always an annex. Annexes, right? Most people don't actually read annexes unless absolutely necessary. We don't. So what it means is usually we don't listen carefully to people, and we don't seek to understand them. And we quickly judge. So this problem of, even in the story of Nabi Ibrahim, I think a very important lesson is also prejudging. If he had prejudged them,
presumptions and all.
He presumed that they were a threat. He presumed that they were something else. He would not have responded salam. He would not have prepared that wonderful food for his guest. So when we look at people who are different as our guests, that requires an openness to just to listen and to learn from other people. And I think it's very important today, because we all know this. We have been saying this for a long time. Our society is very diverse. Community is very diverse. Not everyone is like us. In fact, they can be very different. They have different experiences, different learning pathways, different family context, social context. How do we find something common that allows us to live together amidst this diversity? For example, lifestyles. We have very clear teachings in Islam about, as Muslims, how we lead our lives. But there are people who struggle, and I'm referring to Muslims, for example, struggle because they have, for whatever reasons and experiences that they have, and sometimes it's childhood, sometimes it's certain social experience and context and challenges. They are what they are, but they are different from us. Give a clear example, like someone who is from the LGBT community. So the question is, if you talk about hospitality, you talk about conversations. How do you
start off with
how do you discuss these issues, right? I think, and in fact, in the past, I've been also asked the question of, there are atheists, either the atheists who are very anti-Islam and attack Islam, or there are Muslims who are influenced by atheism. So we should just come out and attack atheism and
draw the line.
I think we need to think through very carefully how we approach these kind of differences in general. And I think the first right step is to not assume that we understand everything fully. So for whether it's atheism, whether it's LGBT, I think we need to listen to people, at least to understand because that is a very, very important part of understanding a particular issue, and therefore you think about what is the best response. There are many cases where we prejudge, we presume, and therefore we say that the response is such and such, and it doesn't work because no one listens to you.
Yeah.
No one thinks it's effective, and all you do is you keep ostracizing, or you keep excluding people from your own community.
Yeah, which creates more problems, and eventually there won't be any form of understanding between the parties or more.
Exactly, and even as in our position, sometimes we are forced to, or people expect us to take a certain position and state what that position is. And I think in some cases that is necessary, but in many other cases, I think that is not the first right thing to do, is to really show empathy by listening, having a conversation with people. Having conversation, by the way, doesn't mean you agree.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you are the same. It doesn't, just because I sit with you and I listen to you, doesn't mean I become like you. We had the same problem with interfaith in the very early days. If you recall, when we have an interfaith conversation, people think that just when you sit with a non-Muslim and your faith is under threat, and you might become like them. Well, they might also worry that of the same thing, right? So I think there are parameters, and I think that fear never materialized because that was never the objective. The objective was just to learn from each other.
So you mentioned about listening to the other. Sometimes, especially regarding when we want to listen to the other, whether we disagree or whether we agree or disagree, how can you actually learn to listen to the other better?
Yeah, listening is amazing. It's such a powerful tool to empower us, to make us better. And I think that's probably why it's so difficult, right? And one of the reasons probably we don't listen is because it starts with our mentality as to where we place ourselves.
Yeah.
So when we put ourselves, again, I go back to that saying of the mystic, when you put yourself at the center, right at the center, and you assume that position where you know everything, right? I don't think you will listen.
Yeah.
So the same thing in our families, with our spouse, with our children, especially your children. If you start saying that, my children knows nothing, I mean, they're just kids, I know better, that kind of attitude, you won't listen to them. And we all know what happens when you don't listen. Communication can really break down. Yeah. And so one of the prerequisites, I think, which can help us listen better, even in our conversations with friends, with stakeholders, with different members of our society and community, is that element of trust, that people can offer something new, people can offer a perspective that you may not necessarily have, and a blind spot. So you need to recognize that for yourself. It's very important to have that. And always believe that, well, someone says something, maybe 90% you already know, or you may not agree with. But if you look out for something positive, you will find, even if it's 10%. And you realize, wow, I learned something new now.
There's always that small bit for us to learn.
Exactly. And it starts with your niyat. So niyat is very important, intention, right? And niyat is so important in Islam. And I always say this, if you set out to look for something good in someone or in anything, you will find it, however hidden that thing may be. But if you set out to look for something wrong that someone does, if you look, someone else looks at that person and say, well, I didn't see anything wrong, but you spotted the mistake because you were out to spot the mistake. So niyat is important. So I was this morning I was looking at some YouTube videos, and I found this YouTube video on the discussion between the coaching staff of Liverpool Football Club. Yeah, so Jurgen Klopp, I mean, our listeners may or may not know this, but I'm a big Liverpool fan, so I'm sorry if this upsets non-Liverpool fans. But I like the current Liverpool team in particular, not only because of the football on the field, but there are a lot of lessons that you can also learn. I mean, as much as you can also learn from other top managers and clubs. I watched this interview discussion between the coaching staff, Jurgen Klopp, Peter Krawitz, and Pepin Linders. So the three, and these were questions on management. And you know what Jurgen Klopp said at the end? He said, after answering all the questions, he said, "Listen and learn."
Wow.
That was his ending. He said, "Listen and learn," and he says, "Listen and learn to these people." So he actually listens and he learned from both his coaching staff, and he has said this many times that he can do his job very well because he listened to the right people, but he also listens a lot, even to listen from his players. And he says, I do this every day. That's my job.
Wow.
Listen and learn, listen and learn. And it proves itself, right, in terms of how the outcomes that we want. So I think the same thing for us. If we learn to listen more and we want to learn from what we listen, I think we will be able to improve. It's very tough, even for me. I think it's something I really hope to improve on. But I'm certain that you will never lose out by listening and saying less, because I think God puts wisdom in so many different hearts and minds, and if you look for that wisdom, al-hikmah dallatul mu'min, if you can find it, if you look for it, right? They're just people who look for dig for gold and minerals and mine for diamonds and so on. If they do that every day, one day they will
Eventually,
most likely discover it. So I think that should be our intention. Every day we wake up in the morning, we want to learn something new, and the way to learn is to listen, right? And in conversations, I think different people, different groups, different lifestyles, learn about them, and then you can think about what would be the response, because your response can hurt people terribly, or your words can really hurt people terribly. And I don't think that is something we Muslims especially want to do. So listening, and that is part of conversations, and listening in a hospitable way, that the person who's talking is your guest, and like you want the best for your guests, give them the best food, make the best tea, present the best food. Same thing, let them speak, put them at the center, and then you understand them better, and then you can have a very fruitful relationship.
MashaAllah. That actually summarized up all the points that we were discussing throughout this whole episode. So from enjoying hospitality as which is part of a virtue in our Islamic tradition, and also to create conversations and to communicate with one another, and which all of that begins with listening. You share with us the importance of listening, and how we can listen by not putting ourselves in the center, but putting the other in the center. Thank you so much, Mufti. That actually I'm really enlightened by the whole discussion. I learned a lot in this episode, and I hope the listeners have enjoyed this episode as well. So look out for more episodes in Tea with Mufti. And with that, we'll see each other in the next episode, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.